It's my pleasure and honor to be able to introduce my longtime friend Sally. No need for an introduction. And her panelists are Marjorie Layden, who is the founder of the World Ethics and Leadership Foundation. And with her is Daniel Fung, and he is the founder of the Cambridge Global Conversations. That's Cambridge, England, but he's going to establish another conversation at Cambridge, Massachusetts with Harvard. He's also the chairman of the United Nations Peace and Development Foundation and Hong Kong's very first Solicitor General of Chinese descent. So welcome the panelists. The title is Ethics of Climate Change, Cambridge Global Conversations.
Well, everyone, you've got your lunches, I hope, and some are still out there, but we're gonna go ahead anyway. I've known these two individuals for a few years now and have been really impressed with the work that they have been doing each individually, and came together to form the Cambridge Global Conversations at Cambridge University, which is now going to spread to Harvard and Oxford. But before we get to talking about this, I want to set the context for ethics. Ethics in the dictionary is a noun, but it actually is a verb as far as I'm concerned. It's because it deals with our behavior. It deals with action. So what are ethics? They're moral principles, they're virtues, they're ideals, they're rules of conduct, dictates of your conscience. Is, in some regards, I've seen where justice has been called an ethic, and benevolence, no malfeasance. All of these fit into that context of ethics. But the results of all of that is action. What kind of action do you take? What kind of narrative do you hold within an ethical conversation, an ethical action? What is it? So we know what the lack of ethics looks like. That's Donald Trump. So we know what that looks like. Nelson Mandela. So what's the difference between them? One is preying on fear and the worst aspects of human behavior. The other one was working on forgiveness and love and prompting the best of human nature to be in action. So that's that in my mind is the difference. So where we get into trouble is values. If we have a conflict in values, if we have ambition that is unchecked by principle or by ethics, and so as a bedrock, particularly with existential risks, if the bedrock is ethical principles, your decisions and your actions are going to be very different. Your narrative is going to be different than what, and consequently your result. So I want to turn it over here to Marjorie and Daniel. Daniel was the founding chair of the Cambridge Global Conversations. It really was to look what I understand originally was existential risks.
We have a video, Sally, too.
And so we have a video, a short video that we're going to play that will set. This is about what the first one that they did. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Which was in July at Cambridge. So.
They didn't end slavery because it was suddenly cheaper to work without slaves. They ended slavery because they knew it was wrong, it had to end, and then they looked at ways to rebuild the economy so it wasn't based on human suffering and exploitation. I think we can do that same thing with climate change, but it is going to be a battle. It's going to be a struggle. It's going to require every inch and every ounce of human ingenuity.
Humans have been getting more and more powerful over the years, and very recently we've reached a point where we're so powerful that we will smash the whole world up, and are smashing the whole world up. Not just if we do really stupid things like have a nuclear war, but if we're not incredibly careful. So suddenly, really recently, like right now, we've reached a moment in which we need to radically change the quality of our stewardship.
Ethical values are right at the heart of what the issue is, to such an extent that if we try to define the problem in other ways, in purely scientific or political terms, for example, we're at risk of trying to solve the wrong problem.
I think there's an ethical question, which is that we should accept that the environment has value in its own right. I think the need for a new ethical attitude to the non-human environment is important.
The issue in America is that most people are scared about their immediate welfare. So they're scared about their healthcare, and they're scared about their job security. So I think when people are fearful, it's very hard for them to think of this esoteric thing, which is climate change. Climate change doesn't have such an immediate gut impact on your friends, on your family, and your job. So I think that is the problem right now, is conceptualizing what is this thing, climate change? What is it going to mean to me?
For a long time, scientists have believed that the reason people don't engage with climate change is because they simply don't know enough, or that the science isn't strong enough. And you can't just engage with people by hitting them over the head with an even thicker report. People ultimately are motivated by their values, by stories within which they conceive themselves and their own world and their own values and identity.
I think when we're trying to educate people and talk to people, it's much better not to use academic terms. I think these concepts are very simple and they're very easy to communicate.
One way of approaching the whole climate change problem is not starting off with the politics or the science or the technologies, but by starting off with, by looking at the values and asking what values would enable us to deal with climate change. So the first is just that we treat all humans with equal respect and with equal value in their inherent worth as humans. The second value is to extend that respect to all other species, plant and animal, so that we respect them not just as servants of humanity, but as beings in their own right and part of our ecosystem. And the third value is to get much sharper and more insistent on respecting truth and more critically capable of understanding when we're getting the truth and when we're not.
People are going to be motivated to make change because something speaks to their sense of who they are, their sense of personal and collective identity pride. And we can show them that climate change is a threat to their identity and the things that they care about. For every group, that's going to be something somewhat different. So if you're speaking to left-wing environmentalists, it's a very different set of values and identity than if you're speaking to, say, conservative evangelicals. But to move forward, both have to be engaged in terms of their own values, but recognizing that the values and identity are going to be different in each case.
You know, we all have those experiences where we're outside and it's a beautiful summer day, you know, the things you reflect back on in your childhood. And we have to communicate that this is what we're trying to protect. That feeling that you had of being outside and probably being with your family and having a wonderful time, that may not be possible for your kids, or already isn't possible for many people around the world due to the impacts of climate change. You know, we have to target it to people's everyday lives so that they know how it's impacting them.
Time is no longer on our side, and what we do, what we begin doing, and what we continue doing over the next 10 years will probably determine the future of humanity over the next 10,000. We have to look for action from governments, from mayors, from NGOs, from private sector, and from individuals. We're all party to this, we're all involved. I'm one that foresees a clean future for all of us, but we're running out of time. We've really got to move quickly.
We live in the age of the pregnant widow. the father is dead, the old world is gone, but the child will be born. We don't know exactly what this new world would look like, but we have a moral and ethical obligation to create an environment as conducive to the baby's survival as possible. We owe this to the next generation. We owe this to our children and our grandchildren.
So what prompted you? How did you come up with this idea? What was your impetus behind these global conversations, and what do you expect? And either one of you can answer this or answer it together. What do you expect to come out of them as real actionable items?
Let me talk a little bit about the genesis, and then I'll go to the solution very quickly. The genesis is this concept of the pregnant widow, which is a striking concept coined almost 200 years ago by the greatest Russian thinker of the 19th century called Alexander Herzen, whom nobody ever reads now because he's not terribly fashionable. But he preceded Marx in identifying that the world that Europe found itself in after the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 was the world of the pregnant widow. The Ancien Regime was dead. The father's dead, but the mother is pregnant. The baby will be born. What do we do? What is our ethical obligation towards that baby? Because we're responsible for that baby, and that baby will be born. What kind of environment do we want to create? That was the genesis. And that inspiration led me originally to start a conversation at Harvard, with which I have some connection, but a very good friend at the original Cambridge said to me, "Daniel, you have made the greatest mistake of your life." And I said, "Absolutely, you're going to tell me I chose the wrong venue." So this person persuaded me to go to the original Cambridge, where I found an extraordinary environment. I was in a long, long conversation with Lord Rees, the Astronomer Royal, whom you saw in the little video, who is basically the leading astronomer in the world today. And he looks at existential risks generally, including asteroids and so on and so forth. And he was very taken by what we were doing, because there were two things that distinguish us from any other academic conference, which I'm not particularly interested to pursue. The first is that the discussion and the conversation, because it is so fundamentally important, has to be cross-disciplinary. It has to be holistic, and it has to engage not just the elite, but millions, because it's the millions whose world is going to be disrupted, affected, adversely changed. And we live in a world where the 99% don't really get a chance to engage in meaningful conversations like this. But the elite is still important, because the elite catalyzes the issues. The elite has information to convey. So the academic conference that you saw a little bit of in that video is just the catalyst for something much greater, which we call the global conversation, which will be conducted electronically, involving millions. It'll be collated. It'll be moderated. That feedback will set the agenda for the next round, because the disenfranchisement of the 99% is what's led to the dysfunction, not just in this country, but all over Europe, all over OECD countries, and also in China, where I'm from, also in Hong Kong, and you've seen what's happening in Hong Kong today. That dysfunction is what we have to address. So the crisis we face is here and now. We need an engaged conversation. We cannot be talking in an ivory tower. That is not meaningful. But we are not anti-expert, because the experts do have value to add. And hence, the holistic approach is hugely, hugely important. And everywhere I've been, Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Georgetown, Chicago, Cambridge, they said, no, nobody. Nobody in the academic world is attempting this. We are the first to try to bridge that huge intellectual, emotional, and social divide. So that's what we've done. I'm extremely grateful to the Well Foundation for supporting this and providing 50% of all the funding. So all credit goes to Marjorie. The gestation period is long. It's took me 6 years to reach this point.
6 years.
It's much longer than human gestation, but it's worth it. It's worth it, and we are going to proceed. And as was mentioned earlier, we're going to take it to the other Cambridge next year.
So if you're talking about a global conversation that involves millions, you must have a dissemination plan. So Marjorie.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Sally, it's so nice to be here with you today, especially being such a dear friend. And just to say briefly that I want to acknowledge everybody here, because I've been around this organization for quite a while. I'm part of the trustees of this and continue to come back because to me, my life has been spent a lot around the world of ethics. I'll take you back a tiny bit for a minute, but I really feel that ethics also, in addition to the other things that Sally very deftly describes, so I don't need to go down that road, but ethics is consistency. And I had a foundation that I'm very much involved with that also serves the climate too, that ended up in conflict with your meeting that was in June. So I missed this for a year or two, and I'm so happy to come back and see what's happened here and how consistent it's been. And I want to thank, and that's ethics. Ethics is considered to be consistency too, and this is who you all are. And your values show that, and I'm honored to be here with everybody, and thanks so much. The Well Foundation was just formed off a private foundation that I was involved with out on the West Coast. We had a course at the University of California on ethics and leadership. We involved the next generation in terms of the undergrads, and we did ethical dilemmas. And what we saw was when we grounded the ethics into the conversations, it wasn't we, the students did this, that it was really enabling, it was positive, and they even spoke about how they'd go back to their parents and other generations and have these great conversations at home. So I developed a huge interest in this and then got the opportunity to open up the foundation in London and go much bigger, and actually did this on behalf of Daniel's opportunity to go to Cambridge, a great thinking place that wanted to expand itself and get more real, get out to everyone. And so the Well Foundation put in some time and energy and money into dissemination, and we went to a top firm in London to see what we could do to get out to a huge group of people and have intergenerational conversations. And this is effectively being carried out because not only did I get involved with the CGC conversation, which the Cambridge Global, which was all about bringing in different sides to the conversation, different age groups. We had young, formative young people. We had Katie Hoffman sitting in the front here, who was there with Nexus Global. We had really exciting top scientists actually talking with probably the biggest climate marcher organizer there. Seeing them talk in civil dialogue was quite incredible. So we're interested in how the future of young people, how the future of adults, how we make decisions, grounding this back in ethics. So Well dedicates its money to these kind of initiatives. We want you to join us. We'll be in the future with CGC, getting with them at Harvard, funding and getting involved with these things. But dissemination-wise, we can announce that we are going to be having a Politico talk every couple of months. It's coming in the near future. We're hoping to reach, or we've targeted about 20 million people in global conversation intergenerationally, and we're focusing on climate. The AI is another thing, but that's directly involved, artificial intelligence with climate. And then just before I drop that, I want to back this up and again acknowledge the group, because I was inspired to do this through meeting with the Dalai Lama. He'd written this, remember Ethics for a New Millennium, way back? And a lot of people have talked about love, a lot of people have talked about the species, and the Dalai Lama said to me in a personal, wonderful moment, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm kind of a mixed here, but he said, you know, if you can get people talking across the world, everything will change. And so I think that ethics does and can bridge those barriers, and it can connect intergenerations. So I'm very, very excited to be here, excited to fund these things, and please come up and meet me and talk to me about your ideas for global conversations. And I especially invite, so excited about the younger generation I'm seeing here. And even dogs can be included. I see my little guy in the front row here wagging his tail here. So anyway, back to you, Sally.
Well, thank you very much for
And thank you
giving
for what
us-
you've done, Sally, by the way. Thank you so much. Can we give Sally just a moment here? She's risen. I mean, really.
Thank you.
Talk about ethical humor.
Thank you very much. That was a really good overview because you've been involved with this, as you said, for a long time and had a course in California, which I understand is really going great, and, and now they can accommodate everybody who's interested to take the course. Is that right?
That's true, but I think that getting to Cambridge, just like Daniel had the Harvard choice, the opportunity to go there, to set up the foundation there and be more global. Wasn't it Tom Steyer that said last night we're getting smaller and smaller? So I really think that there's a great deal of courage in this room and courage up here to sort of still say we're part of that smaller community called the world now. So anyway, it is at the University of California.
Right.
Had a chance to grow that throughout that system, but we think it's more important to get the conversation going with all the multi-generations. So this is, it's ongoing, but again, you know, I think that Cambridge Global, taking on these different conversations, will launch existential risk subjects in a really great way. We'll pull the best of the universities together, and they're great thinkers, but we have to get everybody involved with the conversation, and I kind of believe that many of them want to listen now, because we have to. We're at, as Daniel said, the age of, I've never quite understood the pregnant widow, Daniel, but if I listen one more time, I'll get it, because I know that that means that we really have to have a new world. And so we're in, and we need your help.
So Daniel, as you have been conceiving this and thinking about existential risks as the areas that you want to penetrate, what do you see are the existential risks?
I think these are challenges, risks to the existence of humanity and the biosphere, which lie beyond the ability and the capacity of individual nation states to address and resolve. So take climate as a prime example. Climate does not respect national boundaries.
Right.
Climate doesn't say we stop at the Rio Grande.
Right.
The climate doesn't even affect is not constrained by shorelines either. We know the erosion of the shoreline throughout the Atlantic coast. We know the even more severe erosion on the Gulf Coast. We know erosion on Washington State, and then we look at Southeast Asia. We look at places like the Maldives. They're going to disappear. Now, at the end of the day, no sovereign state, no matter how powerful, not the United States, not China, not even supranational organizations like European Union, can solve any of these problems acting on their own. What it means is that because we are all in the same boat, we live on one blue planet, there is no planet B. Therefore, we need to collaborate, we need to cooperate. We actually need to pool sovereignty. This notion of sovereignty has only been with us less than 400 years. It came at the Peace of Westphalia, which is 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War in Europe, which is the most horrendous religious dispute, which followed on the Reformation between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants. It devastated an entire continent and civilization. Now, therefore, it served a purpose in 1648 to respect national boundaries, etc. But I think post the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, particularly post-dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, this idea of a nation-state is obsolescent, if not obsolete. Its shelf life has expired. We cannot survive if we think in terms of we are Americans, we are Chinese, we are Indians, whatever. We can't survive. We have one planet. The other issues we look at are artificial intelligence, because what does that mean in terms of employment? What does that mean in terms of being human? Because do we become obsolete as human beings? There's a possibility. What happens on pandemics? Do pandemics respect political boundaries? What happens when we talk about resource scarcity and food scarcity and water scarcity, as we're seeing in India today? Does that respect national boundaries? This human construct of sovereignty is, I would say, at least obsolescent, if not obsolete. And if we do not address the need to look at a new global architecture, we're all dead.
And Daniel, and Daniel, what I heard from you saying this about the need for the new global architecture is I took away some things from the Cambridge Global, which again, what was so interesting is watching very, very, very different points of view get along and talk. I mean, he had a scientist there, I'm sure all of us would just gasp, who was tops in seeding the space to bring down the climate, which is very terrifying to most of us, able to talk with the young crowd, climate marching, the people who believed in planting trees. I mean, we had a conversation. It was going on. But I want to read from your climate ethicist that was there from the climate ethicist, and he said the main issue of climate ethics here is that the nature of the climate, the dominant discourse of the nature of climate threat are scientific and economic, but the deepest challenge is ethical. And he said the main areas of climate ethics are the power that we have over the future generations. How do we talk about that? Who has the voice? Who is representing the future in decision making? The power that the rich and the developed high emissions people and states have over poor low emissions people states. And climate justice, which we have, Sally and I were last fall, I sponsored something at Nexus Global in San Francisco. Sally and I were together on that and talking about climate justice with Mary Robinson. It's very important that we bring justice, and we all agree to what that is. The power that humanity has over non-human lives, the new ethics of the biosphere. And then lastly, he's listed the lack of robust institutions and strong theoretical grounding among all peoples at all levels and generations that makes it easy for us to be morally wrong, or perhaps easy for us to be morally together if we have this. So this is what I think we're speaking of, Daniel, is getting this renewed. And Daniel comes from obviously a different part of the world than I do, but I think that speaks to where we are now at AREI. Don't you think, Sally? This is part of what REI represents.
Well, I think in order to achieve what you are talking about, we need ethical leadership, ethical global leadership that everybody can look up to, and we're in a deficit in that area. And so when global conversations take place, you were saying you were going to have political podcasts or whatever they are.
Ongoing, yes.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to pull politicians, heads of state, into these conversations.
Yes.
The other thing is that action on climate change, on AI, on nuclear war, any of these things, and the 5G now is a new, I would say, close to an existential risk, because hundreds of satellites are being put up. Yeah. This is so you can download more information on your computer, but the EMFs that are going to result from all of this, and the antennas that are going to be in neighborhoods, are very risky to human health and to the health of biodiversity. And this is happening without any
conversation.
People aren't even included in a public dialogue. So, and that's happening in the United States, and there's several countries that have banned it. So when you look at existential risks, you know, there's the catastrophic, like the asteroid that you were talking about, that we have nothing, we can't control that. And then there's all these other things that we can control. And ethics is really the bottom line on that, in making those decisions. So we only have a few minutes left, or a minute left. So Daniel, what would you leave with everybody here about the conversations and what your trajectory is for what you would consider success of these conversations?
I think ethics, which is hugely important and fundamental to the entire process, begins with the individual. And it begins with individual conduct and individual behavior. And that I speak to the tradition I come from, because if there's one principle or concept that defines 5,000 years of Chinese civilization, is ethics. Because China has been beat over the head 1,000, 10,000 times that we don't have the rule of law. But in China, the idea is if you have to resort to law, which is both carrots and sticks to enforce behavior, it's a failure of a civilization. The acme of civilization is to lead by example. And the example you give is, first of all, within the family, how you treat your parents, how you treat your wife or your husband, how you treat your children, and how children treat their parents. Beyond that, there's the wider community, and then it disseminates to the entire country or civilization. That type of behavior begins individually inside. Each one of us has to change. If all we talk about is, I'm going to invest in this particular field because it's going to make me more money, that's not the entire answer. That's not the entire answer. I think we have to go deep inside ourselves. And that's the thought I would like to leave everybody in this room with.
Okay, well, we're out of time. And I think this is a really crucial conversation to, to what we're trying to deal with. And existential risks really demand collaboration at a global level that humanity has never had to participate in before. And this is Sheldon.
Sheldon has done a lot of ethics talks. I'm telling you, he deserves his chips. And he's been to four AREDAYs, I think, and right. Anyway, so.
And the inaugural CGC.
And the inaugural CGC.
In Cambridge.
Not on my lap, though, Dad.
Please thank our panelists for their work. Thank you.